Yeah, I get it. This question may initially sound insane to your average historical researcher, or to anybody really. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you care about history or not. The question that we are asking today: did our ancestors possess the capability of flight only a few thousand years ago? May sound insane, but it is a legitimate scientific question. I don't think a lot of people realize this simple fact. I mean, the simple fact is this: did our ancestors possess flight 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago? That's a scientific question. That is not a question based in some sort of a fantasy fictional realm that you can't ask because it sounds crazy. No, that's not true. This is a scientific question. Flight is a scientific mode of travel. It is a scientific thing. So for people who believe that the question is dumb, right, they are not operating in the realm of science. They are not operating in the realm of critical thinking capabilities. This is a legitimate scientific question. And I know now I've said it like 8,000 times, but so you get my point. The only reason why I bring this part up and I repeat it, well, I repeat it because I'm stupid and I keep repeating myself. But the other reason why I want to bring up the question and question the question is because the question initially sounds insane to most people for one reason only. You have been trained to believe that this question is an insane question to ask. Did I say that right? You know what I'm saying? You get it. I know it was like convoluted. My point is that this kind of a question is frowned upon not because it's unscientific, but because in the Western world, we have been socially conditioned over our entire lives in the West to believe that it is impossible for anybody to have created flight before the Wright brothers. Right? Basically, anything before the 1900s, it's impossible. Nobody could have possibly flown. It happened exactly with the Wright brothers and only the Wright brothers, and that is when everything started. And unfortunately, a lot of people are fine with this explanation because it makes scientific sense, and unfortunately as well, observationally, it appears to be true. Because this is something we can track through history, right? We have the history of flight laid out for us, and it's fairly well documented. There's a lot of evidence for it. So when the mainstream makes the claim that flight began in the early 1900s, it's tough to argue with, because here's the other side of it. We really don't have a lot of evidence, at least initially on the surface, that would support any other culture in the past flying around. Right, on the surface level of all of this, and this would be more in the Western world, by the way. I'm talking from a Western perspective, because the reality is other cultures have no problems with the concept of flight being done either by their ancestors or by people that their ancestors knew, right? So this is an entirely Western situation, right? It's an entirely Western mindset. So anyway, so the Western mindset is immediately trained to disregard any kind of real evidence before the 1900s, because the reality is there really does not appear to be any evidence of cultures flying around like crazy in the sky. And there's some truth to that, right? And when you start doing an initial look in history, a very average historical study, you're not going to run across people flying around in the 16th century, right? Nobody's talking about that. Nobody's talking about in the 17th century hopping into their jet and doing, bombing runs on somebody. Nobody's doing this. And it's just like that the further you go back, right? You learn a little bit about Greece. Greece is not flying Apache helicopters. Nobody's going to the battlefield, with their B-2 bombing the crap out of, the Achaeans or whatever, the Trojans or whoever they're fighting at the time, the Franks. It doesn't matter. The point is that we do not see any real precedents on the surface of ancient history to support any real reason to believe that anybody was flying around. So I don't blame anybody for discarding this question, even though we've been trained to discard it. Even if you kind of look at the evidence, it's pretty easy to discard. So, I get it. So we're not going to harp on anybody for doing this. And I was in this same boat like 10, 15 years as well. Had you said to me, dude, I think people in the past may have been able to fly, I would have been like, I mean, I guess, dude, but I need evidence. And that's fair. That is fair. So what I want to do is I actually want to go over the possibility that our ancestors had the capability of flight, and let's see what we can find evidentiary for it. Let's see what kind of evidence exists that may prove that this question actually has a realistic answer, and that realistic answer is yes, our ancestors could fly. Now hold on. I know you are eager to hit that dislike button. I promise I already beat you to it. And I know you're ready to hit that unsubscribe button. Once again, my mom is already there and has done that as well. You are behind the curve. So, before you do all of that, what I want to remind everybody is that we will be covering this topic using only historical sources and using real science. We will not be entertaining anything other than those two things, which means that we're probably not going to have any speculation. And don't forget, I do not have a theory that I am peddling. We are only going to talk through this, and we're going to see where the evidence takes us. That's it. That's all we can do. That's really all we should be doing. Maybe we'll have fun and we'll speculate at the end or something, but we'll declare the speculation, right? All right, so here's the question. Did our ancestors possess the ability of flight? And by flight, I don't mean Superman flight, and I'm not necessarily talking about some sort of a UFO style of craft. I'm not talking about anything like that. Let's keep the flight semi-simple. We now know for a fact, in today's day and age, we can establish a base of, yes, flight is possible. Okay, fine. Flight's possible, not weird. But flight a few thousand years ago? That's weird. And to that I would ask, why? Why do we believe that flight only a few thousand years ago would be weird? Now, I kind of already covered at least one position, and that position is evidence. One of the main positions, right? So if people don't believe in flight, a few thousand years ago, I don't fault anybody like that, because the reality is, on the surface, the evidence is not there. Right? It's not right there in front of your face, at least from a westernized culture situation. That is not the case in other cultures. For example, just to set the stage of how crazy this actually starts to get, India has a huge, literal documented, practically flight manual in the let me try this. Okay. Vayamanika Shastra. Sorry, I'm not smart, okay? I can't read for crap. Anyway, the Vayamanika Shastra that is read in India as a quote-unquote epic, something kind of to the tune of what the Iliad or the Odyssey would be to the Western world. This particular document, when you actually sit down and read it, becomes boring very, very quickly. Now, why would an epic, if I'm comparing an epic to, say, something like Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, how could it possibly be boring? I mean, if this is the India epic, shouldn't it be fun and exciting? Maybe there's some translation problems and it's not, the greatest thing in English, but it should still be interesting. And I agree, it's interesting, but it's hardly an epic. In this particular document, what we find is we don't find this amazing epic story. What we find is essentially a flight manual. And that is what is fascinating about all of this stuff in the Vedas and all of those things, is that a lot of this stuff does not read like an epic or a story. A lot of this stuff literally reads as essentially scientific notation. Now, we will get more into this story in a little bit, but what I want to point out is right off the bat, when we start to ask the question, is it possible that our ancestors had the capability of flight? The next question, once we answer that question as, yeah, I mean, it's scientifically possible. There's nothing unscientific about people flying 2,000 years ago. There's just nothing unscientific about it. The mainstream, even if you go off of mainstream chronology and mainstream science, there's no reason why 2,000 years ago our ancestors could not create something that flies around. There's just no reason. The question is a good, legitimate question. And I know I'm berating this, but I think it's really important to understand that it's okay to ask questions that are scientific, even if the mainstream frowns upon those questions being asked. In fact, I would even argue that if you can find questions that the mainstream frowns on being asked, then you are heading in the correct direction and you need to keep going. Right? That is basically how you should be operating. And that's how we're going to operate here. So we can scientifically establish the legitimacy of the question. Not a big deal. Now it's funny, once we have established that it is a legitimate question, the next question that pops into mind is, why are we not allowed to ask this question? Like, why is it that mainstream historians don't want this question asked and they immediately discard it and literally run away from it? I mean, these are the kinds of questions that the mainstream absolutely dodges. Anyway, they want nothing to do with it. So then we need to ask the next question, why? Why is it that mainstream historians or archaeologists or anybody who works in this area, why are they afraid of such a simple scientific question? It makes no sense. We've all been brought up to think that, oh yeah, the universities and the mainstream, blah, all of these institutions are just, based on science. They're based on the truth. If somebody was lying, somebody else would call that person out and they would be, they'd be taken or stricken down. And then, we would move forward as a scientific community. But that doesn't happen, does it? And this question is exactly a perfect example of that kind of a situation. Why does the mainstream not like this question? Now, the answer is very simple, but there's a few answers. But the simplest answer is the obvious one. If somebody does not want you asking a question, there's a good chance that they either A, don't know and are afraid to admit they don't know. That's there, by the way. Anyway, it's entirely possible that their ego would be bruised. Let's just say it like that. And people are stubborn. They're not going to admit, especially when they are considered an expert in their field. They're not going to be like, oh, I don't know, bro. They're never going to say that. Right? Or I should say, most people are deathly afraid of saying those words. I don't know. Now, I don't care who you are. That phrase is extremely important for you to be able to say out loud about a subject that you are not able to give an answer for. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with not knowing. Mainstream people are deathly afraid of it. So there's that. That's one of the reasons. But the reality is, the main reason why somebody is not going to allow you to ask a question is because there is a good chance that they have something to hide. Now, when it comes to history and chronology and all of this stuff, the reality is a lot of people have something to hide all over this planet, right? Because right now our history and our chronology is being scrubbed, rewritten, just obfuscated. It is insane how much damage has been done to every single person's history on this planet by these people who don't want you asking questions like, did our ancestors fly back in the day? Right? This is a serious problem and it cannot be ignored. Right? They don't get a free pass. Just because they have a degree, that does not mean that they get to say, no, flight's not possible. End of discussion. No more asking the question. We have spoken. We're not doing that. That's not an acceptable answer, especially to a legitimate scientific question. So this actually puts a pretty damning spotlight on the situation, because if these people are not willing to ask the question, which is what they should be doing, right? That's one of the main things we do in science. We are constantly questioning everything. The second somebody no longer questions something, by the way, that's when you know you can discard that person, because they're not operating in reality. They are no longer doing real science. And so that's like 90% of mainstream historians nowadays. They have no interest in being scientifically honest. Once you find a person or an institution that is no longer scientifically honest, you can't use them anymore. They are objectively garbage. And what do we do with garbage? We discard garbage. Here's the example. Do you talk to your garbage can and do you ask your garbage can for opinions on anything? No. The reason why you don't do that is because it's a garbage can. It's trash. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant to the question. Right? So we could treat the mainstream institutions like the trash that they are, and we will. All right. So anyway, I just say all that to highlight the point that the fact that we are not even allowed to ask this question and pursue it in a scientific way, that's a huge red flag. Like, that should have been, every single archaeologist and historian should have lost their mind over that. Like, that should have been, all of them should have come together and been like, okay, something's wrong, somebody's lying, this is not right. We can't do that. They don't do that. It's because they're all corrupt. Okay, you get the point. All right, back to the flight. All right, so is it possible that these guys could fly? All right, so the next question is, all right, fine, yes, it might be possible, but how did they do it? You know, when we look back in the past, do we find any big, large wreckages of flying machines? You know, and the answer is no. You know, the reality, so far as I'm aware, we have not found the wreckage or an intact or whatever. We have not found any of these flying machines archaeologically. Now, this is so far as I know. It is entirely possible that governments out there have located these things, and obviously they're not going to tell us. Right? If a government were to find one of these flying machines, they are not going to come out and announce it. Like that's an unfortunate truth, but it is the world that we live in. So I realize some of you are probably thinking, well, didn't they find one? God, was it early 2000s or 2010 or 12 or something? There was a rumor that at some point a flying machine had been found at an archaeological site. I don't remember if it was over there in the Middle East, or it may have been in India. I think it was I don't know. Anyway, point is that, you know, every once in a while you'll hear one of those rumors. And the fact that I don't know the exact data on the rumor just goes to show that we don't have enough information on it to substantiate the claim. Now, I'm not saying I'm perfect. That's not what I mean. I might just have completely missed the 100% truth. But so far as I'm aware, we have not found that wreckage. We have not found one of these flying machines. Unfortunately, this is a legitimate data point. We don't have the wreckage. All right, fine. So we don't have anything physical at the moment. Or, even more interesting, we do not have any object in our possession that we at least think could have been part of a flying machine. It's funny, the reality is we might actually have artifacts that are part of one of these, if we were able to fly back in the day. By the way, I'm not claiming we were able to fly back in the day. I'm just following evidence right here. We're just asking a question. I'm not saying that it's true or false, but I find it fascinating for the reasons that I will eventually get into 20 million years later. But it goes without saying that without wreckage, the question becomes difficult to answer. Right, it's good to have physical evidence of your claim or of what you're trying to postulate and prove. So, as far as I'm aware, we don't have it. It's possible we have it, and the objects have been misidentified. But once again, I don't have any proof either way. Okay, fine. So what's the next thing we can do? This does not mean, by the way, that it's not possible that people couldn't be flying back in the day. So, for example, let's just say that no wreckage is ever found. Let's just do a hypothetical here. It's entirely possible that we will never find wreckage of any of these craft. And that could be for all kinds of reasons. It could be because of what the material they were made out of. It could be that there was a concerted effort to destroy and get rid of every single last craft back in the day. Or it could have been as simple as, you know, some of these cataclysms, they just wiped out these civilizations, and with the civilizations went the aircraft. So it's possible that we could still find the wreckage. It's still a possibility. You know, we don't have all the answers. We haven't found all the artifacts that exist on this planet. We could still find it, but there is reason to believe, generally scientific reason to believe, that we may never actually find any physical pieces of these aircraft. Like, that's a real possibility. So we have to leave that door open, but we also have to remember that we may never get that evidence. All right, so that sucks. So then what do we do next then? If we don't have the physical evidence, can we continue to ask this question in a manner that may lead us in a direction that proves that it's possible? And yes, the answer is 100%, yeah, we can do that. So the next thing we can do is that we can start going into all of our ancestors' histories, and let's just start looking for the very basic term flying machine or people flying around. We just need to look for that. And sure enough, we find that all over the place on this planet. This is not a unique situation to one culture. We actually do find in multiple ancient cultures' histories, we find people talking about aircraft. And when they talk about this stuff, They do not talk about it metaphorically. That's very important to understand. One of the things that mainstream does is when they translate something and they can't translate it a different way to get them out of what the translation is saying. So for example, when the translation is pretty clear in saying this person was in a flying machine and was flying around, like that's the translation and there's no real other way to translate it basically. What happens is that the archaeologist or the historian will then say, oh yeah, it's like a metaphorical thing. They were flying around with God, yeah, and God of the water and the air, and they were happy, and they were slapping each other, and they were dancing. It's just all metaphors, bro. Don't worry about it. Nobody could fly back in the day. What are you, stupid? That is where they will default to. And mainstream academia is happy with that response. Like that's an answer that they have no problem teaching. That is incorrect completely. When our ancestors say something happened, we need to listen to what they say. If our ancestors say that people were building aircraft and they were flying around and they were describing all this crazy stuff that these aircrafts were doing, aircraft? Nah. Wait, that's not a word. Aircraft? That's not a word. Aircraft. What the aircraft, plural, were doing, flying around. I mean, this kind of stuff is described. It even goes so far as to describe how to build and maintain an aircraft. That would actually be what that original document from India that I was talking about, the Vimanika Shastra, that is literally a flight manual. It is not a fun story because there is no story there. The ancestors of the people who lived over there, whoever the hell they were, by the way, there's a lot of problems with that historically. Regardless, whoever wrote that stuff, whatever culture wrote all of that down and was doing this stuff, I mean, they went out of their way to write a literal field manual for airplanes. I mean, to me, that's insane. I mean, we literally have in the past, where the Vayamanika Shastra comes from, and according to the sources, this document should be about 2,000 years old. It wasn't transcribed until the early 1900s, where it was recorded by some guy who was getting dictated to by somebody else. Basically, the document is said to be written by the rishis, translated by the... Anyway, if you look this document up, what's going to happen is you're going to find that it was at least transcribed in the early 1900s. And I think people try to claim, mainstream people try to claim that maybe it's not accurate because it was finally written down in the early 1900s. But even, I don't know, I didn't really find too many people complaining about it. It seems like the document is legitimately, or at least the story is legitimately pretty dang old. It comes from back in the past, right? So anyway, just in case, anybody's talking crap about it, I get that other side, but the reality is we have no reason to believe that this is not an accurate recording of what this oral tradition talked about. So just throwing that out there to be equal on both sides. Anyway, so this document is a couple of thousand years old, and we have essentially a flight manual a couple thousand years old. What does that say? What does that mean? Even, it's funny, even if, let's just say this is a fake. Let's just play devil's advocate. Like I said, nobody's claiming this is a fake, interestingly enough, but I do want to bring it up just so that we are thorough in how we approach these ideas. Let's just play devil's advocate. Even if this was fake, it being written in the early 1900s, I mean, to make all the claims that are claimed in this manual, this manual is written very scientifically. It talks about all kinds of metal alloys, how to fly, all of this stuff is discussed in this manual. It would be weird for somebody in the early 1900s to make all of this stuff up. All right, so you know what? Let's do this. Here, let's go over the main points in this particular manual, and then we'll just keep going through stuff. But this is a great start to all of this because it sets the stage to show that our ancestors, apparently they had something going on, and not only were they smart enough to build the flying machine, but they even recorded the technical documentation in their history for future preservation. All right, so let's kind of get into this document. So the Vayamanika Shastra, it opens with this statement, quote, "I make obeisance to the divine being, who is visible on the crest of the Vedas, who is the fountain of eternal bliss, and whose abode is reached by Vimanas. Having studied the Shastras propounded by previous men of science to the best of my ability for the benefit of mankind, I shall deal with the science of aeronautics, which is the essence of the Vedas, which will be a source of joy and benefit to humanity, which all facilitate comfortable travel in the sky from world to world in 8 chapters, consisting of 100 topics in 500 sutras. Now, it doesn't go without, it goes without saying that this document is no joke. I'm going to go over a very brief version of it just to paint a picture of what the hell these people were talking about back in the day. The fact that these guys are talking like this are insane. Now, one of the things that's interesting, you know what? Let's let the document talk about it. Here, let's keep going on. So, a quick version of chapter 1, all right? So, Sutra 1 describes for us the nature of the Vimana. By the way, all right, hold on. So what the hell is a Vimana? A Vimana is basically a flying craft. These are in the Vedas and stuff like that. Basically, in the India mythology, a Vimana is a flying machine. So whenever you hear the word Vimana, just imagine an airplane. That's what it kind of is, basically. I don't think it's a UFO thing, by the way, but, well, I don't know. Here, let's read what it has to say. Quote, owing to similarity of speed with birds, it is named Vimana. The Vimana is a vehicle which flies in the sky with speed comparable to birds. That which can fly in the sky with speed equal to that of birds is called Vimana. That which can speed on earth, on water, through air, by its own power, like a bird, is a Vimana. That which can fly through the air from one place to another is a Vimana. That which can fly through air from one country to another country, from one island to another island, and from one world to another world is a Vimana. Now that is fascinating. Right here, not only is this document describing an airplane that can, fly. Okay, fine, whatever, flies like a bird. And they say, you know what, you can fly, over land, country to country. You can fly island to island. So they're insinuating, either, legitimate island to island or continent to continent. Or even more crazy, these things had the ability to fly to other planets. Like, what? What is the why are they talking about being able to fly to other planets 2,000 years ago? Like, what is this? Mainstream science, mainstream historian science, they're all over the map with this. But, if you go far back 2,000 years ago, mainstream people will tell you that everybody thought the world was flat, right? It's some weird mystical flat thing, no planets, even though they were worshiping planets. I see that's the problem, right? It gets confusing because mainstream says everybody thinks the world is flat, but at the same time, they also know for a fact that planets exist, and they also know that planets are spheres. And what's even more funny is that nobody claims the Earth is flat anyway. Everybody knows the Earth is a planet. So anyway, what that kind of shows us and what that reinforces is that even if the flying machines aren't real, let's just say this is a fiction for fun, they were well aware of the concept of other planets. Like they knew it. They realized that there were other worlds beyond the planet Earth. So that says something, man. That completely gets rid of these people being stupid, right? Right there, we're done. These people are already envisioning, if it's fake, going to other worlds. But the question is it fake? Let's take it seriously. Let's keep going. Basically, everything we just read was designed to acquaint us with what a Vimana means. So now we have an idea. It's some sort of a craft that can fly all over the place, including space, apparently. Oh, and maybe on the water? They say on the water, right? Yeah, like a bird on water. Yeah, so they say on water too. So a craft that can not only fly, but can also act as a boat, I guess. I don't know. Interesting. All right, let's keep going. Okay, the texts say that a Vimana pilot should acquaint himself thoroughly with 32 secrets of the workings of the Vimana before attempting to use the craft. such things as the technical details of the craft, special maneuvers and abilities it could perform, how to handle the vehicle in battle situations, and deal with hostile Vimanas. All are described in details in the sutra. Now, isn't this interesting? This manual, it's a manual. Let's just call it what it is. It's not an epic poem. It's literally a manual. And that's how it describes itself, by the way. You know, a lot of people ignore this stuff, A, because it's a dry read, and I get that. If I were to hand you an IKEA furniture instruction booklet, and I'm like, here, bro, read this, are you going to be like, oh, wow, thank you for this epic. I really loved the storyline. You're never going to say that with an instruction manual for furniture. It's not going to happen. Same thing with this. There's a reason why people get bored of a lot of these kinds of documents. It's because they're not describing any kind of like story or events. They're literally just scientific notation on how to do some crazy stuff. All right, and people just write this off. They don't even pay attention to it, which is really weird, actually. Because, I mean, here's the evidence. All right, anyway, let's keep going. So, in Sutra 3, we are told of 5 types of atmospheric regions and the different aerial routes that a pilot needs to familiarize themselves with. All right, so, quote, the regions of the sky are 5. In these 5 atmospheric regions, this number is a little weird in the book. It says 5,19,800. So I don't know if that's 519,800 airways or some other kind of a number, but it seems like multiple thousands. All right, so anyway, there are multiple thousands of airways traversed by Vimanas of the 7 lokas or worlds, known as Loka. Bolhovarloka, Suvarloka, Mahaloka, Janaloka, Tapoloka, and Satyaloka. Rekha has 703 million air routes, tons of air routes. And if I'm totally butchering all of these names, deal with me. I am just not great at this crap. Anyways, tons of air routes. Mandala has 20, 2 million, 20 billion? Jeez. Air routes. Kakiyasha has tons, 200 billion air routes. Sakati has 10,013,000 air routes. And Kadra has 30,082,000 air routes. Yeah, I don't get the way the numbering system works here, so just pause the video and look at it. I've got it on the screen. Anyway, it seems like this document is recording a ton of air routes for air vehicles. You know, and that's interesting that they would even waste their time with that. Like, why would they go to all this trouble to record the number of air routes open to the different kind of Vimana craft? Like, what is even the point of that? If it's not happening, why write that? I mean, you could have I get it, you could have an old school schizo back in the day, you know, creating the story. Sure, that's a possibility, but I doubt it, man. I mean, why would anybody carry this tradition forward if it didn't matter? Like, if this was just dumb fiction, which people back in the day have really wasted their time on it, maybe, but I doubt it. You know, I doubt it. Anyway, let's keep going. All right, so Sutra 4 deals with the danger of quote-unquote whirlpools. All right, so avartas, or aerial whirlpools, are innumerable in the above regions. Of them, the whirlpools in routes of Vimanas are 5. In the Rekapatha, there occurs Shakti Avarta, or whirlpool of energy. In Mandalapatha, there occurs the whirlpool of winds. In Kakiyasha Patha, there occurs Kurniavarta, or whirlpool from solar rays. That's interesting. They're talking about how? Yeah, really? So solar rays even matter. Huh. In the Shaktipatha, there occurs Shatayativarta, or whirlpool of cold currents. And in Kendrapatha, there occurs Garshanavarata, or whirlpool by collision. Yeah, I know I butchered literally all of those. Bear with me. I have it on the screen so you can read it too. If you're listening, I'm sorry. It's my bad. It's not good, right? It's not good. Okay. Such whirlpools are destructive of Vimanas and have to be guarded against. The pilot should know these 5 sources of danger and learn to steer clear of them to safety. Fascinating. Why, if these people could not fly, how would they know about turbulence? I'm going to guess that a lot of this is describing all the various kinds of turbulence that we experience in the air. And probably legitimately little air whirlpools and stuff like that. It's interesting that they talk about the rays from the sun. Solar rays. You know what I wonder, though? Depending on when this document would have been created, it's possible that we were not in the orbit, or at least our official orbit around the sun yet. So we may have still been dealing with Jupiter at this point in time, being our more of our sun than the sun we have now. Maybe. I don't know. But it's interesting that they mention solar rays. And I'd be curious to know if they mean our real sun, the rays from our actual sun now, or if they're talking about rays from, Jupiter or something else. It'd be interesting. I don't know. Just something to throw out there, chronologically speaking. All right. Okay, so they're describing the dangers. These are legitimate scientific dangers. Why would a story waste their... If this was fake, why would people do this? I mean, why go to this length to sit there and describe all of this? And remember, I'm just paraphrasing. This document is huge, right? It's like I gave you an IKEA book of instructions. Right, we're just going over the basics. This is one hell of a fake story if it's fake. So at this point in the text, we at the very least have to admit that the people who created this original text, I mean, they were either really imaginative or they had a really good grasp on the sciences of our atmosphere. I mean, they talk about the different layers of our atmosphere, for God's sake. I mean, how would they even know that? Why would they even waste their time mentioning that? It's such a weird detail to mention the different layers of our atmosphere. And we have that. Why would somebody 2,000 years ago realize we have multiple layers in our atmosphere? How could they even have tested that if the mainstream chronology and the mainstream way of thinking about these people, basically as cave people, are correct? Right? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't work. We have to admit something is going on here. There's no way this could have just been made up back in the day. And why would you do it anyway? Like, why would you waste your time describing this level of detail and then, of course, carrying it on throughout history? It doesn't add up. Let's keep going because it gets interesting. All right, so the next thing we deal with in Sutra 5, this thing talks about the structural parts of the Vimana. All right, so it gets even more interesting. It's one thing to be able to describe your environment. Fine. Maybe they made it up. They looked up at the sky and, I don't know, for whatever reason, they just decided, yeah, I think there's multiple layers in the atmosphere. Okay, fine, whatever. Maybe that's what happened. I doubt it, but it's possible. But now we're going to get into the actual physical parts of the Vimana. Let's see what they talk about here, and let's see if we can relate this to our current scientific knowledge about flight. All right, let's get into the structural components of the Vimana. All right, we are told that a Vimana consists of 31 main parts. Just as the human body, if it is complete in all of its limbs, it is best able to accomplish things, the Vimana, if it is complete in all its parts, will be capable of functioning efficiently. I love this document. I love how it goes out of its way to treat us like absolute idiots. But that's good because it's literally sounds like it's written for your average person. And maybe, here and there back in the day, your average person needed to be told that you need all the parts to have a functioning craft. I mean, I don't know. It's just funny that they make that statement in there. Okay, it's fine. We're all dumb. That's fine. It's cool. The document could treat us. That's fine. Okay. So, all right, it keeps going on. Sutra 6 is going to deal with the clothing required by the pilot. Now, the clothing should be different for different seasons. In this section in Sutra 6, we find a great amount of detail given to the methods for fashioning specific apparel for the pilots of the Vimanas, and this is what they were required to wear for health, safety, and psychological reasons. Yeah, it's very interesting that they would bring up, it's one thing I could see, you got to wear the correct clothes for health. All right, fine, yeah, I get that. And for safety, all right, that makes sense. If we're going to fly in the sky, we could easily imagine somebody just making up, this part. Sure, you have to wear, you got to wear the right stuff to be healthy and safe. But I love how it also very specifically talks about the psychological reasons. Why would they even mention that? Like, what would be the point of that? Right? Very interesting that that's there. All right, let's keep going. All right. So, with this material, fashioning the apparel and clothes of the pilots handsomely, it will ward off evils, promote fitness of body and health of mind, and improve their strength, energy, and competence. Kind of makes it sound like maybe the clothes do more than just keep you warm, actually. Yeah, that's interesting because we have flight suits nowadays that are, pressure suits. We have suits with, water that runs through them for cooling. It makes you wonder if maybe they're talking about something similar. Maybe. I don't know. They don't talk about, well, they go into the materials and all of that. But anyway, it's interesting that they bring that up as well. It's very important. If this was just a general story that did not have any historical precedence or did not happen, I mean, why would you cover this? Or why would you go into that detail? It's just weird. Anyway, we keep going on. In Sutra 7, this deals with the foods the pilot has to eat. So they talk about all the various foods that they need to go through and eat during different times of the year. And I'm going to skip through some of this because we're running late. Well, not late, but we're already like 40 minutes in, and I want to talk about other stuff too. Anyway, this document is just important, in my opinion, because this is an ancient document that describes on a technical level the instructions on how to fly. I mean, it's very blunt. There's no other interpretation for any of this. So that's why I wanted to just kind of go over this to give everybody out there an idea that if flight was real, we would expect a certain amount of technological prowess and intellectual capability, which should lead to something like this existing, and sure enough, we have it. Right? Very, this is a point in favor of our ancestors flying. Right? Anyway, so Section 8 goes on to talk about more of the food types. Sutra 9 informs us of the strict meal times for the pilots. All these regulations, like they're everywhere. Right? It's the exact same thing that we find in aeronautics today. Right? There's all these restrictions and regulations because flying is dangerous. To do flying correctly, you can't just go by the seat of your pants. There's a lot of stuff going on to get aircraft moving. Anyway, you know what I'm saying. You get it. You guys aren't as dumb as me. All right. Anyway, so Sutra 10 deals with vitamin supplements that they can use instead of food should they need it. Very interesting that they focus on food. 11 continues on the food theme. 12 continues to go on to the supplement team. Like they talk about all the different roots, bulbs, fruits, grasses, shrubs, herbs, all of this stuff that you can combine to make all kinds of different, food substances for the pilot. Anyway, Sutra 13 goes into the various metals and alloys used in the construction of the Vimanas. Like, what the hell is this? Why is this document, if it's supposed to just be a story, now we're going to start talking about the alloys that you need to create to build the damn thing? This is a straight up technical manual, right? It's there, right? So, for example, it tells us there are 3 kinds of metals. By mixing them, 16 kinds of heat absorbing metals are produced. Like, what? When this was written in theory, metallurgy should have been maybe not primitive, but it wouldn't have been, we wouldn't be creating alloys that can withstand, re-entry temperatures or anything like that. They're not sitting there making carbon fiber or making any of the, crazy alloys we make nowadays. Why are they talking about this? And they talk about having 16 different metal combinations that are used in creating the Vimana's structure. What? All right. So, okay, let's keep going. 16 metals found by mixing root metals are non-heat conductors and are useful for Vimanas. What? They're talking about conduction? Like right here. There you go. Heat's a problem in engineering, right? If you're an engineer, heat is one of the things that we all hate. There's nothing, if we had no heat, life would be amazing. Heat sucks. They're talking about having to deal with heat problems in their engineering when their machines are flying. Like that is a testament to a high level of scientific knowledge. That's just what that is. There's nothing else that we can read into that. What do you want from me? All right. Anyway, the texts continue. Now, when you read this, apparently there is also a significant amount of geological knowledge in this writing, right? What it also talks about is the extensive mining operations that were used to recover the metals required for the craft, and it speaks of where they may be located. This gets crazy. Now check this out. And I quote, "In the seventh layer of the earth, in the third mine therein, metals of the Soma series are found. They are of 38 kinds. Among them, there are 3 from which heat-resisting metals are to be extracted. In the third section of the 7th layer of the earth, metals possessed of 5 special qualities are called root metals. There are 3,000 metal-bearing layers within the earth. Of them, 1,300 layers contain the better quality. In the 7th layer, metals are of 27 types. The third type of metals are 5-fold qualities and are known as root metals." Like, this is insane. Like, I love how they're talking about, like, layers in the earth. Like, we know stratigraphy is a legitimate thing. We know that you can find metals within, various levels of stratigraphy. These guys have it mapped down to a science. And they're using this science to extract the metals to build a Vimana. I mean, why even waste your time covering this? If this was just a story, why are we going into the sourcing of the materials required to build your unit? There's no reason for that unless you are basically writing a manual, right? I mean, that's what this is. It's telling us what we need to do to create the Vimanas, more or less. I mean, I don't, it doesn't give us schematics or anything, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's here, it's written, it was carried on. All right, anyway. So, Sutra 14 speaks of the methods for purifying the metal ores for use in the manufacture of various alloys. So if that wasn't interesting enough, and it should be, especially if you are, if you're a procurement person or an engineer that has to deal with supply chains, really anybody that has to deal with supply chains, you know how this gets. The fact that they're talking about the required supply chains to build the Vimana, it's just interesting. There's no reason to put this in a fake story. Like, there is a reason why this stuff is put in here, and it's not for entertainment purposes. Are you riveted right now? Are you on the edge of your seat by this awesome story found in this text? No, you're not at all. Most people already fell asleep and stopped watching this garbage, right? For those of you still paying attention, the reality is it's just a checklist. It's not a story. Like, why does this exist? What is this? All right, okay. Anyway, what's also interesting is the text goes on to speak of different plant extracts and concentrated juices that were applied to ores in various ways to produce different types of lightweight metals. That is crazy to me, because it goes on to explain the processes that are involved using these plant extracts to mold the metal. Now, some of you should have perked your ears up when you heard plant extract melting something, and you should have been immediately thinking, and if you didn't do this, that's fine, we're going to train you how to do it. You should have immediately thought of all of those South American megalithic structures in Egypt, Baalbek, etc. Any megalithic structure, those structures that we find with the weird polygonal bricks, that are huge walls, and all of those weird, perfect fitting structures, there's a chance that all of that may have been created not by simply chiseling away at a giant mountain until you got your brick, or your block, I should say, but instead used the juices of certain plants to dissolve and soften the rock material so that you could form your giant block. I find it absolutely amazing that it is mentioned in this technical manual. This manual is admitting right here that you can use certain, biological plants to manipulate rock and metal. If you could, just think about the power in that. If we could have a plant that we could just rub on the surface of a rock and it allows it to become plastic and it lets us mold it, how incredibly powerful is that? Like, that is insane. Like, this is probably some sort of technology we lost. Even more to the point, for example, if you look at a civilization or a building structure over there in that general area, for example, look at Angkor Wat. Angkor Wat, there's a lot of stuff in there that people think was all carved, and nobody knows how the hell all of that stuff was done, realistically. At least the mainstream, they don't pay attention to it. But there's a good chance that a lot of that stuff was carved, maybe possibly using the juices from whatever these plants are. And to go even further, to more validate this part of the text, because I know some people are probably like, what do you mean? You can use plants to soften rock. You're crazy. Like, what the hell's wrong with you? I'm going to have to do a different show on this. But just quickly, we have multiple cultures across this planet that talk about being able to use compounds extracted from certain plants to literally mold rock. Like that is what the claim is. Even more interesting, and like I said, I'll go over this later, there's even been recent papers and examples of this being done. So this might actually be a reality. The fact that we find it here in this kind of a document, as well as other stories around the world, that probably lends some credence to the truth that this was a real thing. So if they had that power to mold metal just by, using extracts from plants, that would be pretty powerful as a production manufacturing situation, right? You don't need huge machining anymore. You can do a lot of stuff just by hand. I mean, you would still have tools, obviously, but if you can just soften rock and then it hardens again once you're done, you just make it into the shape you need to make it, and you can make that shape fit perfectly next to whatever the hell you're building onto it, because both would be soft and you can mold it into each other. Like, that's crazy. Like, that's some pretty powerful building power right there. Anyway, just throwing that out there. So they used it in the Vimana creation, though. That's what they're saying. So maybe they did have something like that. Because one of the things against the possibility of people flying would be, well, how would they have built or manufactured the craft? Like, maybe we could give them credit on like a glider. All right, fine. Maybe they could somehow manufacture a glider with the kind of tools that mainstream thinks they had. But when you start to introduce things like some sort of a salve that you can put on metal and rock to form it, or anything hard, really, any kind of that material, suddenly you can start forming components and pieces to a high degree of intricacy because you have control over it. And once it dries, you're done. It's perfect. It just takes good craftsmanship, and you could probably create some pretty intricate components. All right. Anyway, let's move on from this document. I think we've set the stage to prove that, if flight existed, that somebody would have had to have, there's got to be some sort of good engineering documentation, right? There should be something, you would hope. It's possible that nothing survived, but hopefully something would. And sure enough, we find something that survived. All right, so this is very interesting, and it's a point. It is a scientific point that we have to take seriously. All right, let's keep going. We got tons of other stuff to cover here, and let's keep going. All right, so the next thing we have, another example in history of the possibility of somebody flying, would be the story of Icarus and Daedalus. Now, generally, stuff like this is just considered some sort of dumb legend or some sort of stupid mythology. But what I would implore everybody to do with respect to the flying question is look around and let's see, every time you hear, some sort of a mythology where somebody's flying into the air, let's scrutinize it a little bit. Let's look closer. So let's go over this story, and I'll give you guys a brief outline, and then we'll look to see if this is any help to us. Now, the basis for this story is essentially a tyrant king known as Minos is basically blocked Daedalus and his son Icarus from going back home, right? And so what happens is, long story short, is that Daedalus said, screw this, I want to get out of here. I can't ride out of here, I can't swim out of here, but maybe I could fly out of here. All right, so he's, all right, fine. So what he does is he, quote, set his mind to sciences never explored before and altered the laws of nature. Okay, interesting. So right here, even in this story, it's literally talking about, hey, look, he scientifically approached his problem to try to solve it. He doesn't contact a god. He doesn't do anything weird. He's like, you know what? I've got to create a way out of here. I think I could fly. Let me see what I could do. All right. So what he does, Daedalus eventually constructs 2 flying aircraft, one for him and one for his son Icarus. Now, this story doesn't go and tell us what the power source was for his aircraft. It also doesn't cover necessarily what kind of aircraft it was. So it could either have been a high-tech UFO zooming around at the speed of light, or it could have just been a hang glider. That's the reality. We don't know which kind of craft it was, but we do know that at the very least he approached the situation scientifically. Now, did he probably build a hardcore UFO that just started zipping around? Probably not. I mean, I guess it's not impossible, but he probably didn't build a UFO. But did he just build a hang glider? I mean, maybe, but it seems like he would need a little more than just a hang glider. But it's not really talked about like that. We don't have the kind of detail. So I'm just throwing that out there. Either way. So he goes and he builds these two flying machines. When he does build these flying machines, one of the things that the story goes out of its way to talk about was to make sure that the reader knew that Daedalus goes out of his way to teach his son Icarus how to fly the machine, and that he has to be careful because it's not simple, right? This is not like I prayed to the gods, I grew wings, I flied up like Superman, and then everything was happy. That's not what happened, right? Whatever he built, there was technical knowledge and capability that he and his son were going to have to employ to utilize the craft. Now, to a mainstream audience, you think, well, yeah, no kidding. If they build something, like that, they're going to have to know how to fly it. But that's the point. Why is this story going out of its way to point out in a scientific way that this craft is complex enough to where we have to dedicate a little bit of time learning how to fly it and use it, right? There's no reason to really do that. They didn't have to do it like this, but it's important to the story. It's important for the audience to know that this craft was maybe a bit of a complex machine. This was not a God-given gift. So that's important. That's an important part of the story. Now, once they have the flying machines built, they start flying them, whatever they are. And then it goes on to talk about how everybody is like watching them fly. And they're like, what the hell is this? That's crazy. What? So I quote, some fishermen, perhaps playing with quivering rod, some shepherd leaning on his staff, or a peasant bent over his plow handle, caught sight of them as they flew past and stood stock still in astonishment, believing that these creatures who could fly through the air must be gods. This is an interesting statement. It's a very interesting statement because what it tells us is during this period of time, flying machines were not the norm. Like everybody is watching these guys fly and they're amazed. So what that tells us is that flying machines, at the very least in this area, they were not a normal thing. So if this happened, these inventors, Daedalus, he as an inventor has done something so far as the area is concerned is a new situation. And it talks about it. That's also important to remember, right? Everybody thinks, there's a school of thought that thinks, yeah, everybody was flying back in the day. Atlanteans were just zipping around. Indians were having fun zipping. Everybody just zipping around and everybody knew how to fly. That's not the case. There are times in ancient history where that's not happening, where the concept of flying is very weird. Now, we can get into the chronology of where this story actually takes place, which it probably brings it much closer to us now, which has other implications. But anyway, we won't get into that. Just know that at the very least during this period of time, people were shocked, which means that this was not a common sight. So people were not, flying around Earth all the time at this point in time. Did I say that enough times? You get that? You got that? Okay. So anyway, the way this story ends, or at least it ends for Icarus, that everybody basically knows, is that Icarus flies too close to the sun. And then, of course, his wings, the wax on his wings melts, and then he falls and dies and gets swallowed up in the deep blue waters, which are now called after him. Basically, Icarus's flying machine fails. So there's a couple interesting points in here. A, he talks about mechanical failure due to heat experienced up in the atmosphere. Now, that might be something easily imagined. I could see that, so fine. But they still talk about mechanical failure and how these machines were not infallible. Once again, they are not something from the gods. They are a physical thing that a person has to take care of. The next thing we hear is that it's made out of wax. Some part of this is made of wax. This tells us, this is a component of the flying machine, which probably means it's not a UFO jetting around at the speed of light, right? Okay, so it was probably a very simplistic flying machine. But what kind of flying machine? We don't know. But, it's still told in a very humanistic way, right? There's very human problems with the success of building it, and then the failure ultimately of one of the machines due to structural problems at certain altitudes, etc. So just something interesting to think about. It definitely sounds kind of mythology, but it's also got some engineering in there and some science in there. And the fact that the document goes out of its way to even use the term science, using science as an approach, that's got to count for something. Anyway, so we've got that. All right, let's keep going. Oh, let's do the Egyptian one. Now, most people probably know about this, but I'm going to say it anyways, just to add to the case that we're trying to make that maybe it's possible that our ancestors flew back in the day. So in Egypt, located in a tomb near Saqqara in 1898, and they took this object, labeled it bird object, and then threw it in the Cairo basement, right, in the Museum of Antiquities. And there it chilled and rested, and nobody cared about it until 1969. Now, this archaeologist named Khalil Massia, he noticed the resemblance of this bird object in relation to delta-winged aircraft. And so then suddenly, all of a sudden, it got some more attention, right? So a research committee was immediately formed, and the findings were so impressive that the object was put on immediate display in the museum. All right. So then aerodynamic experts came along and then later testified that in their opinion, the model was remarkably airworthy, indicating knowledge of principles of aircraft design which had taken European and American designers a century of airfoil experimental work to discover. Some experts noted that definite similarities between the model and the recent NASA developments in oblique winged aircraft like the space shuttle design. So it's interesting. This bird thing, one of the most interesting things about the bird is probably the tail. There's no bird that has a tail that's vertical like that. That is very much more an airplane tail situation. Or I should say a modern airplane, aerodynamics thing. You know what I'm talking about? Anyway, is this proof? Is this a model proof of some sort of flight or capability of flight by the Egyptians? I don't know. I know a team, or maybe multiple teams, have tested this out, and they have been able to get it to fly. But, I don't know. As far as it's entirely possible that it was also just a carved toy, that's the way the artist who carved it liked it, and then, nowadays we saw it and we're like, oh, wow, I think that'll fly. And yeah, it looks like we've successfully got it to fly. But, that doesn't mean that they were flying around in Egypt, right? That's not proof of flight. That's an object. This actually brings up a good point that we have to be careful with what we find and what the objects are in reality relative to what we want them to be. So remember that. I'm not saying that this object is not a legitimate model of an aircraft that maybe flew. I'm not saying that. But at the same time, that's not proof. That's not enough proof. But it is interesting. Anyway, next. Now, so far, all of our stories have basically been in the Asia, North African area. All right, fine. There's a lot of stuff there, so it would make sense that we would find stuff there. But here, let's go to the other side of the world, in Colombia. Right now, in Colombia, there was a gold jet that was discovered over there in South America. Now, the tiny gold object is considered to be well over 1,000 years old, and it looks very much like a modern plane or space shuttle. It is thought to come from a pre-Incan culture, which is interesting. Possibly the Toltecs or the Olmecs. Toltecs and Olmecs is a fascinating topic, and the people who truly were the Toltecs and the Olmecs, that gets weird. Anyway, let's go on with this. We'll do a show on those guys later. All right, anyway. The little guy only measures 2 inches long, so he's not huge. So we kind of run into the same situation in Egypt to where we just have a small model, Anyway, so the artifact attracted a lot of attention due to extraordinary resemblance to modern fighter planes. According to one test pilot, a Mr. Jack A. Ulrich, the shape of the wings and the tapering of the fuselage also suggests the original aircraft it was modeled from was probably jet-powered and capable of supersonic speeds. Very interesting. That doesn't prove anything, but it is interesting that a pilot would at least look at that and be like, yeah, maybe that's possible. That's a scientific point in the favor of flight. All right, interesting. Now, the critics say the object could just as easily represent a bird or a flying fish, and this could very well be the possibility. I completely agree with that. Once again, we have to be careful of this stuff, right? But it is notable that the object also depicts a triangular upright tail fin, which has no equivalent in the animal kingdom, and provides a strong indication that it is actually a depiction of a flying machine. Maybe, there are the engineering specs are there. It's hard to deny that. What do you want from me? Interestingly, the miniature model even has an insignia on the tail fin, such as can be found on today's modern fighter planes. This has been likened by scholars to the second letter in the Hebrew alphabet, the letter Beth. It has also been speculated that the artifact may not have originated in Colombia and could have even been Phoenician, possibly imported from somewhere in the Middle East. There are at least 6 other similar artifacts that have been discovered from other locations in South America, such as Venezuela, Peru, and Costa Rica. This stuff was all over the place over there. These people knew about these things. The other part about this that's interesting is the fact that it has the possibility of a Hebrew letter on it. Now, Hebrew is interesting because if you go back and you start looking at things like Paleo-Hebrew, Cauldron, Phoenician, all of these letters are very similar, which speaks to an ancient culture. Right now, we have this split up into multiple cultures. It's possible that all of those letters originated with one very specific culture that history right now is trying to erase. That's also another show, but it's very interesting that we find that symbol over here in South America. There might be good reasons why. All right. So anyway, we've got that stuff from all over the world. The other thing I want to cover really fast before I shut this down is those Egyptian hieroglyphs that people think are like helicopter, UFO, or submarine, or whatever. Now, these hieroglyphs, you guys are going to hate me on this one, but I don't buy into these hieroglyphs being or representing objects like helicopters or submarines or UFOs. In my opinion, there is good scientific scholarship out there that has sort of explained that what we see here is basically 2 kinds of hieroglyphics transposed on top of one another. And it matches fantastically. So as much as I would like to believe that the Egyptians were carving in Apache helicopters and submarines, this is not... I would need more evidence than this. Let's put it like that. It's important to stay skeptical, on all of this stuff. There's definitely amazing evidence that our ancestors did possess possibly the capability of flight. In my opinion right now, based on the real science and the real archaeology, I'm not seeing the evidence to suggest that what we see here is indeed identifying those kind of futuristic craft. And I'm always open to other stuff, but the reality is these hieroglyphs, they really do have all the markings of 2 transposed hieroglyphs that came together. Anyway, I know I'm going to get hate for that, but the reality is that's something I need way more evidence on. So if you have it, please post it. I want to see it. But I have not personally seen a convincing case that overturns my skepticism. So I'm going to stay at least on the fence on this. So until something new pops up. So for example, read all the hieroglyphics next to it. Why would these hieroglyphs, let's ask some questions really quick before I shut this down because I got to stop talking. Why would these hieroglyphs be found where they're found? Ask that question. What does all of that say up there? All right, so when you get up there and you try to read all of that stuff, and I'd have to go get it. I don't have it on me right now. But there's nothing that really flows into those kinds of objects being there. Now, I'm not, I don't have the mind of an ancient Egyptian or whatever people wrote the hieroglyphs. I don't know how they decided to structure stuff. Socially, this could make perfect sense. For all I know, this, they could, socially they would see this and they'd be like, yeah, this guy's predicting the future. We understand that the hieroglyphs next to it don't matter to it because of the way things just, the way we write back in the day. That's possible. But it's just a weird location to have these guys. They're just there for no reason. Why are they there? Why not somewhere else? Why don't we find this, I don't know, in the Great Pyramid? Right? Why don't we find hieroglyphs in the Great Pyramid at all? It's another question. But, why here? That's a great question. Nobody has an answer for that. Why not somewhere more important? Anyway, it's a good question, and I have not found anybody that is able to answer really any of these questions satisfactorily to the point to where it proves that these hieroglyphs are legitimately representing future craft. I just don't see the evidence for that. All right, that's enough of all this garbage. So hopefully what we've done here is we've painted enough of a picture to at least take the possibility of flight seriously in our ancient past. Our ancestors talk about it all over the planet. There appears to be models of possibly some of these aircraft. So I would say that it would be scientifically inaccurate to immediately dismiss the possibility that some of our ancestors, I'm not saying everybody was flying, by the way, that's also another thing to remember. Not everybody was doing it, and the time periods could have been disjointed as well. Anyway, the evidence is there for the possibility, so I think it should be taken seriously. So when you're doing your studies, just keep an eye out for it, because that has the potential to answer certain basic questions, such as, human migrations. That's a good question, because if you can transport people in the air, suddenly migrating humans, that changes everything. So it's just something to keep in mind. All right, I think we've wasted enough time on this subject. All right, you get the point. I got stuff to do.